Welcome back to the archives for round 6 of the National Open. And this is my game where I had the white pieces against Faisel Kaleem. This player is from Louisiana, and I never played him whenever I lived in Baton Rouge, but I did see him a couple of different times. He's a doctor, quite a nice, smart gentleman, and I was excited for this game. I was able to do some research beforehand, so I looked up what he played, and he plays, how the game starts, this line is black, which is a line that I have actually struggled against in the past. I've played D3, I've played knight F3, I think, probably not here, but I think mostly I've captured and played like bishop C4 or queen F3, and I haven't loved those positions. Something like this. I've won some games, I've lost some games, but never as a result of the opening. Always later in the game. It's a pretty good way for black to get a reasonable position. But when I looked online, I saw that there's an interesting line that you can try against it, which is E5. And I hadn't done any research prior to this about E5, but I saw that he was predictable in how he responded. Knight e4, knight back to e2, which is a move I would never normally consider, but the idea is to go to the f4 square and get a kingside attack early in the game. And this is definitely a line I'll consider playing in the future because it scores well, it's dynamic, it's aggressive, and it leads to the kind of game that I want to play. So they play f6 here as one of the main options, and we kick the knight back, and we play h4. And this is all theory. You take here, they play bishop g7, and you play d4. And there's some variations before this, but we won't go into, all the opening theory in this video. But the idea here is that we'll be able to play bishop to d3, and there are even positions where we're going to capture on g3 with the knight or the bishop, or capture on h7 with the rook and play bishop to g6 check. So lots of attacking possibilities here. And my opponent castled, which was not a move that I had looked at beforehand. Pretty natural move, but I didn't remember if there was anything special I was supposed to do against it. I'm sure white has an advantage here. I think this line is just objectively not that great for black. Flip on the engine here. Yeah, it's giving us like plus 2.5, but not a clear tactic right away. So I played bishop d3, which is the move that the engine considers to be best. I figure we'll just keep attacking g6. And my opponent plays bishop to f5. Makes sense. We exchange. And here, this position has been reached several times before in master games and many times online. But knight to e6 is not the normal move played, which just strikes me as crazy. Knight e6 looks so natural, attacking the bishop that's been fianchettoed, attacking the queen, and at least taking away that dark square bishop. But I guess this knight is a lot stronger in this exact position. The computer suggests queen g4, in some line like knight c6, queenside castle, just to give you an idea of how white can try to use this advantage, finish development, and let's just say they play a random move. Then we're going to double on the h-file and go from there. But it's not like there's just a tactic that's +4 here. So queen to g4, I did not consider. I didn't really consider any other moves here. I thought knight e6 looks good. We're going with that. So I played knight e6. We still have an advantage, but it has lessened. And we continue. I take the bishop. I go for queenside castle and getting the queen to h6. One of the problems I didn't appreciate at the time was that if my attack doesn't work, I've really taken a lot of pieces off the board already. And so they play g5. I queenside castle, knight f3, and they double on the f-file. And here I thought that my position was very strong, but again, no concrete tactic. It's still giving me a winning advantage I double on the h-file just like it wants to do. You can see large advantage for white. We're like +3 here. Plays queen e6 as expected. c3, make sure d4 is guarded. Knight goes backwards. And I lose it all with the move rook to f1. So the reason I played rook to f1 is because I couldn't quite make any sacrifices on h6 work. And I couldn't make any sacrifices on g5 work. Some of the ideas I was looking at would be a position like knight takes, rook takes, queen takes, pawn takes, and we come up here with the king. But in this position, the problem is that the rook is under attack on the h-file, so I won't actually be able to take the queen. So the sacrifices don't quite work on g5, and I was concerned about what to do if I move this knight and they get the capture on f2. Now, the computer suggests that I should just go ahead and take on h6. And we get this position here where I've sacrificed the 2 rooks for the queen. And I could not evaluate this position as being that great for white. I thought that the rooks had a couple of different files to play with. I don't see any kind of checkmate here. And the move the computer actually wants me to play is like c4 here, maybe opening the position more. But this is not clear to me, right? Trading off my rooks for the queen to get this position, I wasn't convinced. So I did not do that. I played rook to f1 just to make sure that the f-pawn was defended, and I figured I couldn't be any worse here. He plays g4, which forces the rooks to trade, and my knight goes back. He trades queens, and we get this position here. So now we're getting towards an endgame. He's managed to defend very well, and I could not find any of the winning ideas. But this position still seems reasonable. We've got a better pawn structure in terms of getting some space in the center. My knight has lots of good squares it can go to, and I just want to get my king active so my rook can get active. So my king comes in, and we trade off a little bit more, and we reach this position, and it's a knight endgame. Knight endgames are closest to king and pawn endgames, meaning that if you are up a pawn in a king-pawn endgame, it's usually enough to win. And if you're up a pawn in a knight endgame, it's usually enough to win. While being up simply a pawn in a lot of other endgames is not enough, especially like opposite colored bishops, or if we both have rooks. But knight endgame, I thought if I could pick off one of these pawns, I've got good winning chances. And in this position, of course, it says roughly equal. If anyone has an edge, it is white, but nothing concrete at this point. He backs up. And I think b6 was a mistake by him. It allows me to play b5, really locking these pawns in place. And the reason I want to lock the pawns in place is so that I can kind of skip around the board and target them. And I thought it was harder for him to target my pawns. One thing I didn't appreciate at the time was that I would have trouble guarding this c3 pawn later. So he checks my king, and he lets my king run in an effort to get in and run after my c-pawn. And I thought that this should be good for me because my e-pawn is further advanced. And in fact, it is. This position is now winning for white. I've got this g-pawn that can advance. I've got the e-pawn I'm hoping to push. So I was feeling pretty good here. He continues to run in. And we get this expected line where he gets the g-pawn. I couldn't save it, but I'm going to get the e-pawn, and he's going to get the c-pawn. And we get all the way here. Knight c6, going after his a-pawn. He captures the b-pawn. And I thought in this position that I was basically home free. I was thinking I'd be able to play a4 at some point. I would be able to move my king over and push the pawn. It's important to note that in this position here, knight c6 I thought a long time about, because I was also considering the move a4 to try to distract their knight, which would still have worked. So the key seems to be how I advance the e-pawn. But I went ahead and jumped in right away. I wanted to attack this pawn. I wanted to defend my pawns and help my pawn get to the end. So he captures, and I move my king over, and it's instantly a draw. So the key here is that I actually have to push e6. That way my knight is not tied to my center pawns. If I push e6, my e-pawn can be defended by the king, and that makes it much harder for them to get rid of my advanced pawns. When I play king to d7, I was thinking I could push my pawn and take c7 at some point, but I underestimated him sacrificing his knight on d4. And now when I capture back, he can take my center pawn. And here we have 4 pawns versus 1 pawn and a knight. But if I play e6 first, now if he sacrifices, he can't stop my pawn. And so in this position, there's not actually a lot he can do. He can go knight to d6, and then I can move my king over and advance the pawn. So a very subtle difference, but the difference between winning and drawing. So he goes ahead, he plays the nice trick, he grabs my center pawns, and then the question here is whether I am losing, whether I'm winning, or whether it's a draw. And it wasn't clear right away. I thought that I should be able to stop his pawns with my knight jumping around. And then I thought, well, he can't get to my A pawn very easily, so maybe I've got some chances there. One interesting thing to note is that let's see, we go forward here. Let's pretend I play the move A3. He goes here. Where did he go after? Trying to create a make-believe position. Okay, so let's pretend that, I capture here. He captures. I go A3. He goes here. And we get this position. So now my pawn is 1 square further ahead, and it's still a draw. But in the game, at least, I thought that if I could create a position like this, that I was going to be winning. It doesn't look like it's true, but I thought my king would be able to chase down these pawns. So it doesn't look like it matters where my A pawn was. So he captures here. I'm going to be able to take his A pawn and get back, was what I calculated. So I take the C pawn, I take the A pawn, and then I get back in time with this check. And now was whenever I thought that if my pawn was on A4, it would make all the difference. So how can we create that to check? So let's pretend I play. Where does he go after this move? So I go there, and then he pushes the pawn. Yeah, so this is the move I thought I needed to stop. So let's pretend I go here. Right, so some position like this. Yeah, and so in this position, I'd be winning because I would get the B pawn. But I didn't see a way to create that. And so since my pawn isn't already on A4, my king doesn't have time to take the B pawn. So my knight has to blockade their pawn, and then they advance their B pawn, which stops me from advancing my A pawn. And their king is going to be able to chase down my A pawn before my king can take the B pawn and push my pawn to safety. So maybe there are some winning chances there, but I couldn't quite make it work. I regretted a little bit not pushing the A pawn earlier in the game. Chances are that would change the whole course of the game, though, and it wouldn't have actually had a direct effect on this exact position. So I go after his B pawn, and he's able to chase my knight, and unfortunately here, there's nothing I can do. I cannot try to push past, or they would take en passant, and now I'm the one losing. So in this position, after he plays king to b2, we agreed to a draw. Really exciting game. I was happy that my prep got me a good position. It was an interesting mistake that I made, not being able to convert. I didn't really understand how knight e6 wasn't the idea, and I didn't consider enough moves at that moment. And then, while I did consider giving up the 2 rooks for the queen, I didn't appreciate how good that position was for white. And then we got an endgame where I think I played pretty well. But then I missed the subtle difference between moving the king or the pawn first. So definitely some things to learn from, but I was pretty happy with this game. This opponent, much like all my opponents in the tournament thus far, and in the last round also, were very polite, very friendly, and enjoyed discussing the game and the ideas with him also. All right, thank you for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Good luck in your games, in your studies, and I'll see you next time for the final round of the National Open.